And welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from one fan's real, honest perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 43. This is the summer recap episode, the Summer of Joe, as I like to refer to it as. Not much has actually happened this summer. It's luckily been no news. Sometimes no news is good news. Unfortunately, we saw some terribly tragic news happen around the NFL this summer, so for the Bengals, knock on wood, we're just about a week away from training camp getting started. All the guys are going to start reporting back to the team. It's going to talk about some of the big stories that happened because there wasn't too much that happened with the Bengals. But Tee Higgins signed his franchise tag, did not get a long-term contract extension officially. So that just passed. The deadline for signing a new extension for Tee Higgins has passed, but he did sign his franchise tag tender, meaning he's going to report to training camp and he's not going to hold out or anything like that. No drama from the Tee Higgins camp, which is great. I mean, like I said, no news is good news. There's really no Tee Higgins news to report. He's going to show up and make his $21.8 million. And if he has a great year, maybe the Bengals will sign. It's not like the Bengals don't want to sign good players. I think people are trying to make it out like, well, Tee Higgins is just not going to play for the Bengals after this year, no matter what, guaranteed. Like, the Bengals are going to make Tee Higgins an offer, and it's going to be whether or not Tee Higgins and his agent want to accept the offer from the Bengals or whether they'd like to try to get a better offer from another team. If, for whatever reason, the Bengals offer turns out to be the best offer from Tee Higgins, then he'll be back. So we can't worry about what's going to happen. All that stuff will take care of itself after this season plays out. So let's live in the moment, enjoy this season as exciting as we hope it's going to be. Now, we saw a lot of Joe Burrow over the summer, and Joe Burrow's really become the face of the franchise. Not like he wasn't the face of the franchise already. We already knew that, but he's really taken on that role. I think now that maybe he's got a little bit of financial security, he signed that contract in the offseason. He's a little bit more established in the league. He's taken the opportunity to step outside of his comfort zone. We saw Joe Burrow over in France. He was on Instagram playing chess against some guy on the French Riviera with Jamar Chase in the background. And we saw him do a photo shoot for Vogue magazine. He was eating all kinds of fancy cheeses and dressing with suits without any back on him. It was literally like another Seinfeld reference. This is why it's the Summer of Joe, because he was, if you saw that Seinfeld episode with the Mel Torme, where Kramer goes to the Tonys and he makes a grand entrance, and I think he got the Novocaine, so he couldn't talk, and they thought he had like some kind of handicap, and he came in there and busted off his back from his suit and came twirling in, making a grand entrance. That's basically what Joe Burrow did at the Paris fashion show. He came in with Justin Jefferson on his left side. He was walking in with the suit modeling, and the back of the suit had open and had like a little tie in the back. It was a backless suit, an interesting look, and he was getting a lot of commentary, let's say, from social media about that, and it was going around, making the rounds on different NFL shows. I mean, you got to think about it in context. Like, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. When you're at the Paris Fashion Week, Vogue fashion show, and you're around a bunch of supermodels, you wear what they give you to wear. If they say, here, wear this backless suit, and you're Joe Burrow, you put on the backless suit and go, because that's what Joe Burrow, he doesn't care. He's, a professional. If they say, I'm sure, if they would have said, put on these assless chaps, he would have had some questions. But backless suit, no problem with that. It's testing the limits of, masculinity and being avant-garde. And that's what Joe Burrow is all about, is breaking barriers, being a pioneer, a trendsetter. Everybody wants, I'm sure we're going to see like backless suits being all the rage because Joe Burrow started it. You heard it here first. Backless suits are going to be blown up this year. But outside of making news in a fashion sense, Joe Burrow just being back in front of the camera, in front of the spotlight, was a story in and of itself. I mean, yeah, okay, rookies, free agents, honestly, who cares? Like I said, most of us really just care about Joe Burrow, and then, yeah, the rest of the guys are pretty good. Jamar Chase, Can't forget about him. Pretty cool too. And Trey Hendrickson. But Joe Burrow gets priority. And Trey Hendrickson found that out. We'll talk about that later. But the biggest story was just seeing Joe Burrow back in front of the camera doing press conferences again, because after he got injured in that Thursday night game against the Ravens, where we saw him trying to throw the ball and he couldn't even throw it, and just the look on his face of agony. And then we just saw him on the sidelines with his wrist in a splint after having surgery to repair that torn ligament in his wrist. We didn't get to see any of Joe Burrow's interactions with the media, any questions and answers that we're so used to seeing him on a weekly basis. And Joe Burrow never does in the locker room, just off the cuff interviews with the beat reporters. It's always a very controlled environment, clean room interviews for Joe Burrow, so it's sanitized. He can control the narrative tightly. So when we finally saw Joe Burrow back at voluntary OTAs, or organized team activities as OTAs, we saw Joe Burrow back with the rookies, and the first thing you noticed was he was looking like thick. Like his neck, he looked like he had gained considerable weight, and I was concerned about that because he hurt his wrist, so I was worried that he wasn't going to be able to maybe lift weights and use that wrist to, do a barbell or a dumbbell or some kind of heavy lifting. But his training staff, kudos to them. They figured out a plan to let Joe Burrow work around that wrist injury and still be able to put on some muscle mass, because he's looking much thicker. I think he said he gained 10 or 15 pounds. And everybody says that, in the summertime, oh, I totally reshaped my body, put on 10 or 15 pounds of solid muscle. I'm in the best shape of my life. Most people do say that. But for Joe Burrow, it was just visually obvious. He was kind of like the opposite of Tua Tagovailoa for the Dolphins. Just a brief tangent on him. We saw pictures of him. He looked like he lost about 30 pounds in the offseason because he was way too heavy at the end of last year. His thighs were rubbing together. His cheeks were super puffy looking. And we saw him, he was totally unrecognizable. So that's going to be interesting to see a smaller Tua, how he's able to play with the Dolphins. But anyway, back to Joe Burrow. Because, Tua, nobody cares about Tua. But Joe Burrow, he was looking good. He was looking tan. He had the hair going on, and he was just so, it was just so breath of fresh air to be like, oh, yes. As much as Jake Browning did a good job when he was playing, taking over as the backup, he played okay, but he didn't have the same Joe Burrow swag and personality. So that was the thing we were missing. And when they were asking him about his wrist, he gave very similar answers to about when he had that horrible knee injury his rookie season, coming back from that, talking about how he's going to have to do maintenance, work with his training staff and doctors and physical therapists. And he's still being pretty private about that whole process. He doesn't want to give away all the details and talk about how much pain he may or may not be in. But he did acknowledge that there's going to be some inflammation, some fatigue, some pain that he's going to have to manage and deal with throughout the season. And that's easy for us as fans to forget. And he's still going through that with his knee, with his fingers, with all of these injuries that he's accumulated over the years. He doesn't talk about them, but they accumulate. Just with any professional athlete, you kind of deal with your injuries privately. So not everybody's conscious, but you are every day when you go out there. You can feel those injuries for sure. So that's going to be a thing Joe Burrow is going to have to deal with. But he said in one of those interviews, it stuck out in my mind, was he couldn't wait to get back with the team because he said, quote, "I'm addicted to getting better." And that was one thing that really stood out, because that's Joe Burrow's mindset. That's what makes Joe Burrow so great. He is a very talented athlete, but it's not necessarily his athleticism that makes it so good. It's his mindset that he's determined every single day to be better than he was the day before, be the best Joe Burrow he can be every day. And that attitude is infectious throughout the team. And I think that's what's inspiring to so many people about Joe Burrow, is everybody can take a lesson from that mindset. Everybody can try to be better every day, be addicted to getting better if you want to be. It's all about your attitude. You can't necessarily control your situation, what you were born into, but you can control your attitude. And if your attitude is addicted to getting better, then you are going to be the only person that's going to stop you. So that's why Joe Burrow is the leader of this Bengals team. And so that's why, I had to make this podcast to continue getting better. It would be easy to stop, to give up, but no, I'm addicted to getting better and making this podcast for you, the listener, and all you Bengals fans out there who need some inspiration. Speaking of inspiration, we also saw Ja'Marr Chase. He was not at the voluntary workouts, but he did come back to the mandatory OTAs. He didn't do a whole lot of actually running around, anything that would risk injury, basically. He was just kind of standing around with a hat on, shorts and T-shirts, watching, observing. So he didn't really miss out on anything in terms of, if they were putting in a new play or a new concept or some kind of call they wanted to make, let's call this, Tiger on the field or whatever it is. So Ja'Marr Chase will know that when he goes into training camp, he'll be up to speed with everything. But he wasn't going to do anything that would risk injury because Ja'Marr Chase is coming into year 4 of his rookie contract. Now, just like Joe Burrow, he was a top 5 pick. He is eligible for a contract extension, just like Joe Burrow was last offseason. And the weird part about Joe Burrow was, even though everybody knew he was going to get his contract extension, the Bengals waited until the day before the season started, the Saturday before the first game of the season, to sign Joe Burrow. So I'm not optimistic because, Joe Burrow is the face of the franchise quarterback. I'm not optimistic for Ja'Marr Chase, who plays wide receiver, is not the face of the franchise. I'm not optimistic he's going to be able to sign a contract extension with the Bengals before this season begins. So hopefully there's no holdout kind of situation from Ja'Marr Chase. We'll have to see. Last year with the Vikings, Justin Jefferson didn't hold out. He reported to training camp, played all season, and he was rewarded for that from the Vikings this offseason with a new contract that makes him basically one of the, I don't know if he's tied with Nick Bosa for the highest not quarterback in terms of salary per year, but he's getting roughly like $34-35 million per season. Obviously, Ja'Marr Chase compares himself with Justin Jefferson. Ja'Marr Chase is going to want a contract that's equal to or greater than whatever his friend Justin Jefferson got. So whether the Bengals offer that now or later, Ja'Marr Chase is going to just be sitting there like, okay, well, if they don't offer to me now, I don't want to risk anything in terms of injury, because we know they've already signed Ja'Marr Chase for his 5th-year option. So he's going to be on the team for another 2 years guaranteed. But that 5th-year option is not anywhere close to $34 million a year. If I were Ja'Marr Chase, I would not, I would try to hold out and try to get that money basically as soon as possible. Don't wait, because the longer you wait, the more likely it is that you could have a serious injury. Your career would be over, and then that life-changing, super huge contract just disappears and you never get it. I wouldn't want to see Ja'Marr Chase have that type of situation. He's going to have to do what he's going to do. He's already dealt with a couple injuries, but he's been lucky he hasn't had anything serious in his career. Hopefully, we don't have any drama, but we did see, he's going to have to take a lesson from what he's seen from how the Bengals operate with other players, namely Tee Higgins. He hasn't gotten any kind of extension. He saw what they did with Jesse Bates. They franchise tagged him and let him go to the Falcons. Outside of his boy Joe Burrow, who seems to be somewhat of an outlier, the Bengals in recent history haven't done a great job of extending their own. Like Jonah Williams, he was the first-round draft pick. They just let him go to the Cardinals. Not that they really wanted to keep him that much, but hasn't been a great track record of getting people signed. And we have to remember, Ja'Marr Chase is a Pro Bowl player 3 times. All 3 seasons he's played in the league, he's been nominated to the Pro Bowl, something that Joe Burrow hasn't done. I think he got 1 Pro Bowl when they went to the AFC Championship the second time. He didn't actually get nominated to the Pro Bowl when they went to the Super Bowl, which was hilarious. But Joe Burrow only has 1 Pro Bowl. Ja'Marr Chase has 3. Trey Hendrickson also has, does he have 3 Pro Bowls? I think he has at least 2 or 3. He was a Pro Bowler with Ja'Marr Chase this season, and he felt like he outplayed his contract. But the problem for Trey Hendrickson was he signed a contract extension last July. So he was holding out or at the draft, we talked about this. Trey Hendrickson said he was either thinking about retiring or he wanted to be traded away from the Bengals unless they gave him basically a raise, because he was one of the league leaders in sacks, and guys like TJ Watt and Myles Garrett are getting paid $10 or more million more than him per season. So he feels vastly underpaid. Well, the Bengals said no, and Trey Hendrickson promptly reported to voluntary OTAs, which was strange. He was threatening to hold out, retire, all this stuff. Then, like 5 days later, he's reporting, showing up to practice like nothing ever happened. And it was just kind of a whiplash of like, okay, so Trey Hendrickson, they asked him about it. The beat reporters asked him about it in the locker room. So like, what happened? He was like, well, I talked about it with my family and the Lord, and I guess the Lord told him he needed to get a raise. So he asked the Bengals, and they said no. And he was like, that was very hard for me to hear, that I wasn't going to get a raise, but basically there's nothing I can do about it, so here I am. And so one of the reporters, they went back and forth, and they gave him enough leeway to say whatever he wanted to make up about, trying to save face, basically, that he looked like a complete fool. Finally, one of the reporters at the end asked him, so do you regret signing that contract extension last season? He was like, that's a good question. So obviously, yes, is the answer to that. He obviously does regret it. But he said something about, no, this is a great situation. I love it here. Great team. And I don't know. It didn't make any sense. But basically, they called him on his bluff. Bengals were like, Trey Hendrickson, you are bluffing. You are not going to retire. You are going to play for the contract that you signed last year. And that's the bottom line. And that's what's going to happen. So that's what Ja'Marr Chase is looking at and saying, okay, this is how the Bengals, they play hardball with guys. They don't mess around. They don't give in to the demands. If Ja'Marr Chase holds out, Bengals aren't going to blink. They let Carson Palmer go to the Raiders because he was going to hold out. They're like, go ahead and hold out. We don't care if you're the number 1 overall pick. Ja'Marr Chase isn't going to hold out most likely. We're hopefully going to see the best we can of Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins, frankly. One player we're hoping to see good things from was one of the rookies, Jermaine Burton. Out of all the rookies, he's probably the one that's made the most noise this offseason just because he's looked so good in those little clips that we see on YouTube from the beat reporters who put him out. And it's just, maybe they're wearing helmets, but mostly, I don't think they're wearing helmets. They're like just wearing like shorts and t-shirts, throwing it and catching it to Joe Burrow. But they mentioned how Jermaine Burton made a point as soon as Joe Burrow came out onto the practice field, he made a beeline to go and catch passes from Joe Burrow. And for whatever reason, the equipment guys were out there catching the balls from Joe Burrow instead of the receivers, instead of guys like Charlie Jones and Andre Yosivas and Chase Brown and all these guys. I'm thinking, well, if Jermaine Burton is smart enough, now credit to Jermaine Burton for being a rookie to say, hey, I want to go over here and catch all the passes from Joe Burrow in warmups to get comfortable with him. I'm comfortable catching his passes. He's comfortable throwing with me. We can, chat a little bit, build up a little bit of a personal rapport, so when he can think about who does Joe Burrow want in the lineup, call up on your buddy Jermaine Burton. So that's smart from Jermaine Burton, and maybe TJ Houshmandzadeh, his mentor and coach, put that into his ear to get in, that's smart, hey, get up there, be buddies with that quarterback because you want that quarterback to be your best friend, throw you the ball. He knows what's up. I'm glad that we got Jermaine Burton because he's got that first-round talent. He's got strong hands, catches everything, and he's going to not necessarily, replace Tyler Boyd exactly, but he's going to take the snaps on offense that Tyler Boyd was probably taking a lot of last season. Tyler Boyd played a lot of snaps, but unfortunately didn't give us a lot of production in his last season as a Bengal. He has moved on to the Tennessee Titans, joining Brian Callahan and a couple other Bengals. Chidobe Awuzie also went down to the Titans. We'll see them again probably this season. But I think Jermaine Burton, once he picks up the offense, he's going to be a huge upgrade in terms of playmaking, explosive potential, and hopefully clutch moment catches over Tyler Boyd. And, we love Tyler Boyd. He's made so many huge plays for the Bengals over his career, but there's that third down in the Super Bowl, big drop that could have extended the Bengals' drive. So let's not dwell on the past right now. We're thinking about the future. The future is going to be great. The future is going to be amazing. What else? The rookies, they got their numbers. It's not really that important. We'll go through the rookie numbers at some point later, but all the rookies almost signed their rookie contracts. The only rookie who's still not signed his rookie contract is the first-round pick, Amarius Mims, which is not concerning yet. He's out of the 32 first-round picks, 5 rookies have not signed their first-round contracts yet. Bengals being one of them. The Bears have not signed either one of their first-round picks, either Caleb Williams or Rome Odunze. Not sure what's up with the Bears. Maybe they're just working something out with the agents. And I'm not sure what's up with the Bengals. We'll have to see when the Bengals open up training camp. Maybe that would be like the first day they'll sign him to his rookie deal. Hopefully there shouldn't be anything to negotiate, because this day and age, because of the collective bargaining agreement, they've already agreed upon a set, slotted in, predetermined salary for what the rookies are going to make from the first pick in the draft down to the last pick. So there's really no stipulations or things that they really need to argue about too much. There's only some very minor details in terms of maybe when the signing bonus gets paid out, in terms of, does he get all the money right now, or is it paid out in installments over a certain amount of time? Are there kind of different clauses in the contract or not that they may have a problem with? They don't want to sign to protect the player's best interest, and the team wants them to sign to protect the team's best interest. So there may be something like that. Hopefully that gets worked out. But Amarius Mims, he's the big 6'8", 340-pound tackle from Georgia. He was at the camp, and it was good because Trent Brown, the free agent they signed from the Patriots to play offensive tackle, who's also like 6'8", 350, he was not at training camp. Him, Sheldon Rankins, Jamar Chase, Tee Higgins, they didn't report to the voluntary training camp because, they don't need to. They've been in the league. They're veterans. The only thing that can happen is getting injured, probably, for them. They don't want to risk injury, so totally no problem with Trent Brown not showing up. His spot is secure. He's not worried about this guy who's never played, not only has never played in the NFL, but has barely played any college football. Like, he didn't even play an entire season at Georgia, Amarius Mims. So I don't think Trent Brown is really concerned about starting week 1. He's got the starter spot locked down. That's why they signed him and gave him millions of dollars. They didn't sign him to sit on the bench. So he's going to play no matter what. It's just a matter of staying healthy, getting through the offseason for all these older guys. And so we haven't had anybody pop a pec muscle lifting weights, nobody strained a hamstring. Not that we would necessarily know. The teams, they're not doing like injury reports on a week-to-week basis in the offseason. So sometimes it's weird. You hear about injuries like 2 months after they happen. Like, 2 months ago, this guy had surgery and he's been rehabbing and we think he'll be ready by week 6. So it's like, we didn't even know about that. And they'll, do interviews, not even mention it, act like nothing happened. And sometimes they'll even talk about the guy by name like they're not injured when the entire time they are injured, and they just want to make you think that they're not. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird how the NFL really has no accountability for anything. They can pretty much say and do whatever they want. But one of the big stories, not necessarily related to the Bengals directly, but it affects them indirectly, was this NFL Sunday Ticket lawsuit with DirecTV, where, if you're not familiar with this, the NFL basically had this monopoly of, you had to pay some ridiculous. I never got the Sunday Ticket because it was way too much money. It was like $300, or it went up, I'm sure, over time. But they've been doing this for the last 30 years. You had to get direct. So if you wanted to see all the NFL games, you could only watch the games in your local region. They have this stupid like blackout policy, and so it really frustrates me because a lot of times I can't watch the Bengals game because I'm not in a Bengals market. I'm in a Browns market or some other market where they're not showing the Bengals games. And you I would love to just pay a flat fee. If I could pay sign up $50, $75, maybe even $100 a season to be able to just watch on my computer or wherever every Bengals game, whenever on demand or whatever. Like, why couldn't the NFL just give, you don't care about every game from every team. Maybe I don't want to watch every single game that happens. Maybe I only want to watch the Bengals game. That's not necessarily true. I watch lots of other games. So they're just trying to say, you're getting such a great value because you get to watch every game from every team. It's like, that's not even a good use of your time, honestly. Nobody should realistically be spending their time watching every single game for every team. That's way too much football for anybody. So they purposely withheld the ability for you to just watch the games that you want to watch. That's why the price was so high, so exorbitant, and really ripping off people. So it was a class action lawsuit. So a group of people got together to sue the NFL. And that's what is really scary, because it's not just one person suing the NFL. It's thousands or even millions of people in this case who were affected by this. And so the damages against the NFL, in this case, the NFL lost the case. So the case against the NFL said the NFL was doing antitrust behavior, meaning they're basically running a monopoly to artificially make prices too high for consumers. And because of that, the jury in the case found the NFL guilty or negligent or whatever. They were awarded $4.7 billion to the plaintiffs, but according to U.S. law, and I'm not an attorney, but I've heard this on other shows talking about this, they've said that according to U.S. antitrust law, any damages get tripled. So the $4.7 billion turns into $14.1 billion that all of the NFL teams would owe in this lawsuit. Now, I know the NFL makes billions, but this $14.1 billion is obviously a lot of money. It's actually roughly the same amount of money that all the NFL teams, through their big pool of television revenue, which is their biggest source of revenue. So not the ticket sales, not the merchandise, not the concessions, all that other stuff that the teams keep for mostly themselves, but the pot of money that the NFL gets per team each year combined, that's about $14.5 billion. So this lawsuit would be basically the equivalent of the league losing 1 year of revenue, which would be a big deal. I mean, they don't want to lose an entire year. If you break it down per team, I think that would be somewhere around like $450 million per team, or like $500 million per team that each team would be responsible for in this lawsuit, which is like basically, roughly the salary cap. No, half of the salary cap. So what is it, 250? So it'd be 2 years worth of player salaries that each team would have to pay. So 2 years worth of salary is a lot of money in this day and age, that, on top of what they already have to pay. So if the NFL does have to pay back this money, you can expect prices for everything to be going through the roof in the coming years to make all that money back, because they're not just going to take this lightly. These NFL owners are old, greedy bastards, and they will do everything that they can to unscrupulously get as much money as possible, as we have seen. That's the whole point of this lawsuit, is they knew that they were ripping people off, and they did it anyway. And they've already spent that $14 million on their fifth yacht, and they have to keep the maintenance going on all these yachts and mansions and luxury condos built on top of skyscrapers and under the bottom of the ocean and in some kind of nuclear missile silo that you don't even know about. And so, like, a guy like Jerry Jones, who, quick side note, just to give you an idea of the type of person Jerry Jones is, he's been in the news recently because he filed a counter lawsuit against a woman who may be his biological daughter because of breach of contract, because she came out and said that Jerry Jones may be her biological father and hasn't really been involved in her life and has been extorting her or something like that. And basically he was saying, like, you were never supposed to say that you might be my daughter, and so I'm going to sue you for $1.5 million. Jerry Jones does not need $1.5 million. He's a multi-billionaire. He owns the Dallas Cowboys, which is the most valuable franchise in the NFL. So it's really, really petty for Jerry Jones to go after this woman who, again, may be his own daughter. He's going to sue her for $1.5 million for breach of contract for saying publicly that he might be her father because it makes him look bad, and that he has an illegitimate child with another woman who is not his wife, and he doesn't want that out into the public consciousness. So he's going to sue this woman for the money that was basically went to raise her as a child. So all the money, this $1.5 million, went to her school and, raising her, taking care of her when she was a kid. Kids are expensive, and, it's from like 30 years ago. I can't, maybe he's charging her interest, but that's just so ridiculous. That's nothing. $1.5 million for Jerry Jones is nothing. It's just the principle of the thing, which is why he's doing it. But again, he's so rich, he should just let it go. Like, don't even, why? It's just making him look. Anyway, so this is the type of owner that we have all over the NFL. Let's not make these owners out to be like benevolent saints. As much as they want to make these YouTube in-house productions, making themselves look really good and charitable and nice, and so, no, these guys are old, greedy bastards. Speaking of greedy bastards, NFL media, I got a bone to pick with them. I got something that's been on my mind for a couple months now. So after the draft and everything happened, if you're a podcast listener, NFL has their official podcast. They have podcasts about fantasy football. They have Move the Sticks with Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks, who are some former NFL professional scouts, so they know about that. But they also had the Around the NFL podcast, which was on the air since at least 2013. It was a very popular podcast from NFL, and it was originally had 4 hosts: Dan Hansis, Greg Rosenthal, Mark Sessler, and Chris Wessling. And they would do a podcast 3 times a week. It was very popular with the international audience and fans who watch mostly NFL Red Zone, which is popular outside of the United States. I think a lot of fans in the United States, they get, like a lot of Bengals fans, they only watch the Bengals. They only concentrate on one team. And fans from outside the United States, they don't have any allegiance to any specific team. They just like watching the game of football, and they'll watch all the games, all the teams, any game that's good or interesting. And so that's what the Around the NFL was great, was they would just, as the name would imply, talk about all the different teams around the NFL. They would cover all the divisions, all the interesting games. The teams that were more interesting or having more success would obviously get more attention than the teams that were kind of at the bottom of the barrel, not doing anything interesting, not having anything to talk about. But it was a fun kind of show where it felt like, you were a fly on the wall listening to 4 guys sitting around at the bar just kind of talking football. It was a fun, lighthearted show. It didn't have any ads. It didn't have anything to do with gambling. They weren't selling you on anything. It wasn't about fantasy stats and it wasn't too hardcore football analytics or anything like that. It was more journalistic, just trying to be fun, entertaining, witty. They said, some football analysis with a dash of mirth is kind of the way they pitched it, I think. So it was a cool show. Unfortunately, a few years ago, Chris Wessling had a battle with cancer, which he had inevitably succumbed to. So now they name it the Chris Wessling Podcast Studio. The original 4 hosts had dwindled down to 3. Dan is the host with Greg and Mark. And then it was usually a rotating 4th guest, either on a Zoom call or actually in the studio. One of the other people on the NFL network would come onto the show, like Patrick Claybon or Colleen Wolfe or one of the other people. But what happened this offseason was very shocking because they'd been doing the show 3 times a week, never missed a week. Even during the pandemic, they had shows from, they were zooming in from home. It was kind of weird. Maybe 2 years ago, they let go of some of the producers on the around the NFL podcast with this wave of firings or cutbacks or whatever you want to call it. The NFL was letting go a lot of people who work for the league office, and they let go of the people on the podcast, but not the actual hosts of the show. So that was a little bit strange. You're like, why would it was a successful show, one of the most successful shows that they had. Why would they be letting people go on the production staff? But the show went on, and then over time, as a lot of things go, they started to work in more advertisements because you felt like the people up in the executives of the NFL were thinking, how can we make money off of this podcast? Why are we paying for, this show to exist basically if it's not making us money? So they inevitably started working in more advertisements. They went from having no advertisements to having like tons of ads injected into the show. And then they started doing ad reads during the show, and they'd be sponsored by different things. And after a while, I don't know if it was, they kind of lost the dynamic with the fourth host with Chris being gone, but something about the show kind of changed. It lost the fun, it lost the energy. It seemed more like they were just kind of going through the motions. Okay, here we go again. Yeah, we're going through them. We've done this before. It's just kind of a repetitive, and with a lot of long-running shows, they had like the same jokes, same in-jokes. They'd play the same sound effects and same sound clips of the different hosts from the past 10 years. It's like if you are just coming to the show brand new, you don't know all these jokes. It doesn't make sense to you. And of course, time changes everything. As these guys are on camera, they started off not young, and they have continued to become even more not young to the point where they're getting a little bit old. And you could just tell like the way that the players would react to them. Sometimes they have players on like at the draft or whatever, and the players would make reference to these guys' age and being like, yeah, you guys are kind of like old, because they were literally like twice as old at least as all the players. So it's kind of tough as, like a 20-something guy, you're talking to some guy who's in his like late 40s, early 50s. Like, what does this guy know about me, my culture, anything about me? So it was just kind of a weird dynamic of like, they're these fat old dudes basically sitting around talking about young guys playing football. It had become just kind of a strange thing. So all of a sudden, around the NFL podcast doesn't have any new episodes after the end of May. But there was no announcement about, hey, we're going to be taking a break. We're going to be taking a little hiatus here. We'll see you, in 2 weeks. We'll be back in, 10 days, whatever it was. Didn't hear anything, but all of a sudden, there's just no new show. So it was like, you're scrolling through your podcast feed, like, wait, did I miss something here? Did they change the podcast feed? Did I need to go to switch to a new feed? Where are my podcast episodes that have been showing up for the past 10 plus years, 3 times a week? Where is it? Give me the podcast. And then, I go to their Twitter, nothing on the Twitter, nothing on the social media accounts, no announcements, no nothing. So it's totally confusing. Finally, like 2 months later, Greg Rosenthal announces that he's going to be starting a new podcast called NFL Daily with Greg Rosenthal and some guest hosts also along with. So basically, the 4 podcast hosts had become 3, has now become 1 plus some guests. So Dan and Mark, those podcast bozos, pour one out for them because they are unfortunately no longer employed by NFL media. And it's, it's just the way that it happened, like no farewell episode, and it was unfortunate the episode they went out on. The last episode they ever did was one of the worst episodes, honestly. It was the quintessential, off season. There's nothing to talk about. And you see a lot of these shows during the off season, they'll do just lists for no reason. Let's make a list and talk about it for an hour. So that, the list of the top quarterbacks in the NFL, the list of top teams in the AFC, who's going to be the team that goes from worst to first this year? Who's got the best offensive line, the best defensive line? You get it. All these different, just manufactured topics, players we want to see playing on a different team. So the last episode was NFL Glossary A to Z, and it was just an A to Z list of topics about the NFL in some way. So it'd just be like, air attack. Like, it was just like, what is the point of this whole episode? So they would go around or in a circle. There's 4 of them, and they would just take turns. Okay, A, B, C, D, and then go to the next person. And, some of them were like mildly entertaining, but it was really like, what is the point of this show? What does this have to do with the NFL? If I were an NFL executive, I would have been watching that like, why are we paying these people to sit here and talk A to Z? This isn't making me any money. Let's take this show out behind the barn. And I think that's what they did. They did the old yeller on the around the NFL because it had worn out its welcome. It had run its course. There was nothing left for them to say. Time for a new show. And unfortunately, Dan and Mark had to move on. But it's just the way they did it unceremoniously, just like an NFL team would cut a player. But even an NFL team, I think, would have like the decency to have like a farewell social media post, like, thanks for working here for the last 15 years, gratitude and good luck and something. But they were just like, slipping these guys out like a fart in the wind. Like, they just disappeared, like nothing even happened to these guys. I'm thinking about my boys, Dan Hansis, Old Blue Eyes, and Mark Sessler, the Quiet Storm. Hopefully they start something. That's, they said they're going to start their own thing. You hear that? I mean, it's easy to say that, like, oh, I just got fired. Well, I'm going to start my own company then. Forget you. I don't need this. So good luck to those guys. They got a lot of friends in the industry. I'm sure they have connections that they can get hooked up with whatever they want to do in their next venture. But it's going to, they've all got kids and families and to feed. And I feel bad for Greg Rosenthal also, because now, like he says to start his new NFL Daily Show, he's beyond lucky to be Greg Rosenthal and still having a job at NFL Network and still getting paychecks. So it's a weird situation for Greg to have to come in, do a new show that's in the same studio. It's in the same Chris Wessling podcast studio, but now it doesn't have the same hosts. They changed the background that they have for the show, and they don't use any of the same sound effects. So they're starting from scratch. Basically, they're going to have to come up with their own new jokes, and maybe they won't do that anymore. I think the NFL would prefer not to have this kind of personality-driven content. If anything, they want to have people talking about gambling, fantasy football, things that are going to somehow make them more money. And I think a lot of the thing, instead of what they replaced around the NFL with in some part, was just highlight clips of NFL players in the game. That's what they've been doing a lot on NFL Network. They're taking off their Good Morning Football, all these shows that cost money to produce, and they'll just put on rerun clips of highlights of players playing that doesn't cost them anything. They've already, the games are already played. They've already got them in a vault somewhere. They can just pull out the recording and say, all right, yeah, we got a highlight of this. Unfortunate as the listener, and especially for international listeners, around the NFL podcast was a great listen. Multiple times a week we're going to be deprived of. I'm trying to get into the NFL Daily, but I still feel a little bit betrayed. So it's kind of hard for me to listen knowing that it's missing the elements that had made it great for so long. But, sometimes change is good. You got to change it up, move on with life, move on to something different, or try something new. Speaking of trying new things in my own personal life, because that's really the extent of the Bengals news. They're going to start training camp next week. The biggest thing that came out, a little hint, I think Joe Burrow got a haircut. Looks like he got a buzz cut, which I don't blame him, because when it's going to be summertime and it's super hot, like there's going to be in Cincinnati in the end of July and early August, if you have a bunch of hair, it's like just in the helmet on, You're sweating. It's just like unbearable. So I totally get the clean buzz cut. Some of the ladies aren't going to like it, but it's going to grow back. Don't worry. Joe Burrow he's like a chia pet. The hair is going to be back before you know it. But one of the things I did while there was nothing going on from a sports perspective, went to a concert from a band that I just heard about within the last maybe 18 months called Khruangbin. You have to look up Khruangbin, spelled just like it sounds, of course. And it means airplane in Thai. But anyway, they're it's a band. It's a 3-person band. They got a guitar, they got a bass guitar and drums. And they play, it's a real, obviously, very simple, minimal sound. There's only 3 people, and it's not very complex. But they're just playing kind of eclectic mix of different cultures. I couldn't really call it one genre. Some people call it genre-less. It's a bunch of like Middle Eastern, Asian, African, blues, hip-hop, funk, reggae. It's so many different things all mixed together in different songs. So every song is different, but it was an amazing concert they gave. It was an outdoor concert that had a little bit of rain, but it was luckily warm outside, so the rain didn't really bother us, and they managed to get through the concert without any kind of lightning or anything like that. So that was cool. If you ever have an opportunity, check out Khruangbin in an area near you. What else? Video games, of course. This game Balatro, if you've ever heard of it, it's like a poker solitaire game, but it adds an extra element of strategy where you get different joker cards you can play with your poker hands to like get extra points, and the whole thing is how can you get as many points as possible to hit this goal. And it's like a light deck building thing where each game you can kind of build up a different type of deck, but when you start a new game, the deck resets back to normal. So you're not like having to pay money or grind out for different special rare cards or anything like that. It's not that type of addictive type of thing where they're trying to get money out of you. You just pay like $10 for the game or whatever it is, and then you can play as much as you want. But it's a very cool, interesting strategy game. You can play as much as you want. It's one of those things it's addictive in the sense of the games go by so quick where you're just like, oh, well, I could just, let me just play one more. I almost won that one. Let me just get one more game here. And then, that repeats over and over and over again, obviously. But that's a great game. I think I've pretty much wrapped up everything I want to do in that. I'll come back to it, because you can come back to solitaire whenever you want, whenever you've got a few free minutes. So I'll come back to that. But I've unlocked all the decks in Balatro, if that means that if anybody's played Balatro, I've unlocked all the decks, meaning I beat the game multiple times, including on the second to last difficulty. There's a harder difficulty that I haven't beat. Gold difficulty. Haven't beat gold difficulty yet, but I'm getting close. Anyway, I got to move on from that because Elden Ring DLC has just come out. I'm ready to go into the DLC. I'm at the point in the game. I just got to buy it. I don't know. $40 is kind of steep for a DLC, but everybody says it's a lot of content. It's big. It's probably not as big as the original base game, which is huge. But, if it's a good amount of content, I guess $40 would be worth it. But I generally don't like to spend that much on video games, but in entertainment in general, I try to limit that as much as possible. But hey, sometimes you gotta pay for what you have fun with. One thing I won't be paying for is I'm not going to go to a Formula One race and buy any food, especially not at the Miami Grand Prix. So over the off season of football, I've been watching Formula One racing. It's been more entertaining than I thought the season was going to be. Everybody thought Max Verstappen was just going to run away with it, win every single race, and he's still in the lead by a considerable margin. But lately, some of the other teams have been creeping back into the picture. A few other teams have actually won races, including Charles Leclerc from Ferrari won at Monaco, his home race. So everybody's going crazy about that because he had Charles Leclerc, whichever way you want to say it. He had a number of near missed opportunities where he was on pole. And for Monaco, he grew up in Monaco, raised in Monaco. It's his home race. Everybody loves him there. He was on pole position in qualifying one year, and then he had an issue with his car where he couldn't even start the race. So that was a huge disappointment where everybody's all excited because Monaco is a city tight circuit. It's extremely hard to pass. So if you can get in the lead, it's basically, you're not guaranteed to win, but it's a great chance you're going to win. So everybody was like, oh yeah, Charles Leclerc, he's on pole position, he's going to win, and his car doesn't even start. That was kind of like the Bengals last season. We're like, oh yeah, Joe Burrow, he's looking good, and then, whoa, blows out the calf right before training camp even gets started. It's like, oh man. So Charles Leclerc, this year, I can't remember, I think he was on pole this year, but whatever. It was a boring race. The only thing that was interesting about it was that he won the race. So good for him. Then we saw Lando Norris in Miami, as I was alluding to. Lando Norris in Miami got his first win in over or close to 200 race starts in Formula One for McLaren. The thing about the Miami GP was they had these pictures going around on social media for like all the food prices being insanely ridiculous, of like nachos, $250, sliders, $300. Like, what was it? Like caviar, an extra $100. And they were trying to make it sound like, oh, well, this is for a group of people. It was like lobster rolls, $200 and some dollars. It was like, oh, this is for like multiple people. This isn't just for one person. Anyway, don't go to Formula One if you like money. But then we saw George Russell win a race in Austria where Max and Lando crashed going into turn 3. Looked like Max Verstappen squeezed Lando to the outside a little bit too much. Lando didn't have anywhere to go. They came together, their tires hit, and somehow both their tires popped. And they both had flat tires just from making contact with each other. It was weird. I don't know if they like just hit each other at the perfect angle. Both their tires popped. They were both effectively out of the winning. Lando was out of the race completely. Max ended up in like 5th. Still got some points. Sergio Perez, by the way, a huge disappointment for Red Bull. He's not picking up his end of the bargain. He's not even scoring points in these races, leaving all the point scoring to Max Verstappen. So Red Bull is in danger of maybe not winning the Constructors' Championship. Max is, probably going to win the Drivers' Championship at this point, but the team or the Constructors' Championship is still up for grabs, because if you don't have both drivers scoring points, you're vulnerable. But after George got the win, then it was another Mercedes win in even more dramatic fashion. Lewis Hamilton got his first win since 2021, won the British Grand Prix. It was an epic race. It was in the rain. There was a lot of tire strategy. Some teams got it right, some teams got it wrong. When to come from the intermediate wet tires to the dry tires, and which dry tires should they pick. Lewis went to the soft, Max went to the hard. Lando should have picked the mediums, but he pit too late, and then he went onto the soft tires instead of the mediums, so he wasn't able to win the race, and he was very disappointed after that. But Lewis got the win. He was crying, embracing his father, driving around, waving the Union Jack. All the British fans were loving it at the British Grand Prix. So a very British 4th of July that we had going on there. But now the summer is starting to come to a close. We're seeing Joe Burrow in the media. And that's the other thing, is we're seeing more Joe Burrow in the media talking about when you're out of the spotlight, when you're injured, people forget about you. So Joe Burrow is trying to come back and make people remember him. And that's going to be through his play on the field. One of the other things Joe Burrow said was the biggest thing for him is going to be able to play in every game this season. He knows how valuable he is from a competitive standpoint and from a financial standpoint, how valuable Joe Burrow is to the team. So he's got to be ready to play and stay healthy. Part of that's going to be the offensive line, keeping him upright, but part of that's just going to be Joe Burrow taking care of himself. One of the other things Joe Burrow said that was interesting, I thought, was in one of these interviews when he was in France, they gave him some softball questions, typical questions, and one of them was they asked him, what's something that most people don't know about you or whatever, what's something that most people wouldn't know about you, Joe Burrow? And he kind of gave an answer that was a non-answer, but an interesting answer in itself. He was like, well, that's one of the things that I've been trying to work on is showing more of myself, showing more of a personal side, making more of a connection, reaching out and, building his image up, basically, building more of his brand. He's kind of let the media cultivate a brand for him, but I'm sure he's working with maybe he's got a marketing agency now that he's got his new contract, thinking about being more conscious about how can he be more in the public eye, build up more of a persona. And so he gave this long answer about how he wants to do that, get out there more, but at the same time, never actually said anything that somebody doesn't know about him. So he's answering the question of, oh yeah, what don't people know about me? Well, I want to get out there and show more about myself and blah, blah, blah. But he never actually said anything about himself. So that's the genius of Joe Burrow, is he gives great answers and seems like so insightful, but at the same time, never gives you any information about himself. And that's part of, protecting himself. I get it. You open yourself up for all kinds of harassment, people just trying to mess with you, or just, a competitive advantage. You don't want people when you're in the game saying stuff to you about your, where you went on vacation or your wife or girlfriend, something personal about you. You don't want to give people information about you. But at the same time, Cincinnati's a small town. He doesn't want to say, oh, I love going to this restaurant or I love hanging out at this place. All of a sudden there's going to be 1,000 people there wanting to hang out with Joe Burrow every night. So he's got to kind of be protective of himself that way. I get that. But it'll be interesting to see if he is able to kind of show a little bit more of that inner Joe Burrow monologue that we know is he's always thinking, but everything he says is very calculated. And I wouldn't be surprised if that continues, but maybe he'll open up. We'll see. I don't expect to see any Joe Burrow podcasts anytime soon, but he has made more appearances. That's one thing he didn't really do too much of. Hopefully he doesn't turn into an Aaron Rodgers podcast type of guy where he's going on, ESPN every week saying controversial stuff. I don't want that. I like a nice, clean-cut, good, wholesome image Joe Burrow that stays out of the spotlight. I much prefer that. We'll come back next time. Maybe there'll be a little bit more news. Maybe we'll have an Amarius Mims contract signing, or maybe training camp will start to kick off. There'll be a few more news items. Oh, one last thing before we go. I forgot to mention this. I can't believe I forgot this. Speaking of trying to make money, the Bengals selling the TVs. They sell these old used televisions from Paycor Stadium. There was a couple months ago, they sold 200 televisions, cash only. There's no warranty. I think they gave you a remote maybe, but they were basically all the TVs that were in the luxury boxes are getting replaced with new TVs. So they're ripping out all the TVs from the luxury boxes, replacing them, and they're like, hey, if you want to come down and pay us between $30 and $60 for a television, it's all yours. Did the Bengals really need money that much? Even if you add up, they did it twice. They sold 200 TVs and 150 TVs. So even if you do that, a few hundred TVs times $50, I mean, maybe they're bringing in $20,000 at the most. Do they really need $20,000 to have this whole rigmarole? Why couldn't they just donate them to charity or sell them for charity? Hey, we're doing a fundraiser and all the proceeds go to help something that's not just like the Bengals. It's kind of weird for a team to be selling old used televisions out at the stadium. But whatever. So we got lots of fun stuff like that to look forward to from the Bengals this upcoming season. That's all going to be kicking off. Before you even know it, we'll be back in the swing of things and podcasting like nobody's business. So don't go anywhere. We're going to have a fun season ahead of us. Remember to subscribe, do all this stuff. Give me a rating. So until next time, I'm going to leave you with a hoo-day and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.